Anyway, I do have a lot of experience in publishing, and so, and obviously several of you do too. So all I can do is talk to you from my own experience, and others will share theirs too. And I think the first thing to be said is that not everyone has to write a book. Everyone wants to write a book, but not everyone should. But so that lets you off the hook if you have some think, oh, I should write a book, but are not quite sure what to do. So you should be seeing. All right, so the first page is the books that I have had published. The ones on the left are nonfiction, and these three and this one, if you, well, over here, these four I published in the last year myself. This is the Complete Idiot's Guide to Handwriting Analysis was my first book, which came out in 2000. And as a matter of fact, it came out just about 6 weeks after my daughter was murdered by her boyfriend. So having to go on a book tour after that was kind of difficult. But one thing that's really important in publishing is if you're going to write a book, you're going to have to market it. Otherwise, nobody's going to buy it, which is fine if you're just publishing it for yourself or your family. But if you want it to sell and for other people to get it, then you have to distribute. The ones on the right are published by Suspense Publishing, and Proof of Life is a fiction. That's my latest book, but it's a spiritual, a supernatural suspense. So I've had experience in having a big publisher. This Idiot's Guide was published by Macmillan, and my mysteries were first published by Penguin, and now I'm much happier with a small publisher who gives me a lot more control over things like the cover. They have great cover design. With a big publisher, they decide on things like title and cover. They send you an email and they say, here's your cover. We hope you love it as much as we do. And if you say, no, I don't, I'm sorry, it's too late to change it. But with a small publisher, they're happier to work with you on it. So here's my top 10 tips for writing. Write what you love, which obviously if you're writing about spiritual things in this group, you're doing that. Write a good book, which means you have to do the work of learning how to write. Read books on writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, they're very different. So I've got, I think I counted over 60 books on writing, some of them on fiction and some on nonfiction, because they're really different things. Leave out most of the verbs. This is especially true in fiction, but in nonfiction too. The verbs, those ly words, are also the ing words. They weaken the writing because you're telling the person how they should feel. And it's better to use strong verbs rather than the ly ones. Kill your darlings. That means don't overwrite. You know, everybody has their own style and their own voice in writing, but these days people respond better to clean writing without lots of overblown sorts of descriptions. Exclamation points are a big no-no. You should have no more than a couple in the whole book. When people critique your story or your manuscript, and if 3 people are saying the same things that's negative, then listen. It's still your choice in the end what to keep and what not to keep. But if several people are saying the same thing, it's important to listen to them. And in that vein, you should always hire a good editor. Even when I have books that I'm publishing through a publisher, I have an editor that I work with first. And after we're done with the whole book, then I hand it over to the editor at the publishing house. Don't show your book to your relatives and friends until you're done, because you know they're going to usually say, oh, it's wonderful, I love it. And they may or may not believe that, but they're just not equipped to give you the proper critique. That's why you need an editor. And then the most important thing, after you've done all of those things, is to market the book. And we're going to talk about some things to do with that. So just quickly going through, There are two kinds of writers. There's those like me who outline, and those who go by the seat of their pants. We call them pantsers, and they just start writing, which is, either one is fine, but you're still going to have to go back and edit. If you write an outline, what I find helpful is, I mean, my outline is always flexible and it can change. Like in one of my fiction books, I got to the middle of the book and I realized that what I had planned for the ending of the book needed to come there. So I had to rewrite the outline a bit. But an outline helps you get your ideas in order. And that's important. You want to be, orderly. If you have a critique group, or you join a critique group, or you form one, it should be, there's lots of writers groups and they'll talk about all different kinds of writing. But what I found most helpful is to be in a group of people who are writing the same kinds of things that you are writing, so that they'll understand the conventions of that genre. So you could go on to the Facebook page and ask, would anybody like to be in a critique group, so that you can talk about each other's writing and as an initial run through. And then, as I've said before, hire a professional editor. Next, you can either, if you want to get a major publishing house, like Hay House, you have to have an agent. And getting an agent is really difficult, and I have had 7 of them. And what I found is that most of the ones that I know don't do any work. They want you to do all the work, and then they may introduce you to some publishers, but it's very difficult to get an agent and then to get a good big publishing house. But there are lots of small publishing houses too that you don't have to have an agent. If you are going with an agent, or even if you're going directly to a publisher, I recommend this book that I've put here, and I will make these slides available to Wendy so that you don't have to write all this stuff down. But Author 101 Best-Selling Book Proposals shows you exactly how to do it. On the other hand, if you're going to self-publish, which is, as I showed you, I've done with my nonfiction books, I used KDP, which doesn't cost anything at all. And I was able to design my own covers quite well with what they have, and they show you how to do it. They've got videos to show you every step of the way. There's BookBaby, which does cost, and Ingram Spark. And I'm sure that we'll hear from Anne about her publishing. Oops. But you'll have to do the cover design and formatting and all that sort of thing. And you have to decide if you're going to write an ebook, a print book, which you probably do both. And then there's also Audible for audiobooks. And I have now 5 of my books are on Audible. And ACX is a company that works with, or Amazon owns them, and they own Audible. And what you do is you post on their site an excerpt from your book, and then narrators will send you a little audition, and you choose between who you like. And it doesn't cost anything if you do a royalty share. You can choose an option where you pay the narrator, which could cost you a couple $1,000, or you can do it for free and have a royalty share. And the share is something like, I don't know, I'm not even sure, but Amazon, of course, gets most of it. It's like maybe 60-40. And then the narrator and the author split the 40%. So you don't make much money on it, but it gets the name out there. The writing process, if you want to be a writer, you have to read and write in the genre that you're writing in. See what other people do that you like, that works for them, that's successful, and also what doesn't work. So reading is important too. It's good to set goals. Some people will set, I'm going to write for 2 hours every day, or I personally prefer to set a goal of 1,000 words a day, which is only a couple of pages. It sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. I don't do it every day, but setting goals is good because it helps you to get there faster. And you want to find a good place to work. Now, I live most of the time by myself. Right now I have a house guest, but the cat allows me uninterrupted time, and I have a good place. So find a place where you can be uninterrupted for whatever your goal time is. And set up the space in a way that you're going to enjoy it, whether it's lighting a candle, putting on music, and any way that gets you in the mood. If you have, well, writer's block, you know, it's a funny thing, people say, talk about writer's block. If you write professionally, you can't afford to have writer's block. If you're a plumber, you can't say, I have plumber's block and I'm not going to go to work today. But of course, if you're just writing because you enjoy it, that's your choice. But if you're really feeling like you just can't write, it's okay. Take a break. And research. Now, in my book, Proof of Life, I had some wonderful friends, including Wendy, made all the difference in the world in my seance scene in the book. And people comment on it all the time. Mediums comment about how realistic it is. And research whatever you're specifically writing about. It's really important. Then finally, there's the marketing. You could hire a publicist. I've had several publicists with mixed results. The latest one, he has, well, some of them can be like $3,000 a month, which is way out of my budget. But the one that I just used, I had him for 6 months, and he has 3 levels, 500, 750, or 1,000 a month. And I hired him for $750 a month, and he did a lot of social media work for me. I don't know at this point whether it really helped or not. But if you're not going to hire a publicist and you're working on a shoestring, the Author 101 series has a book for that too. Best-selling book publicity, The Insider's Guide to Promoting Your Book and Yourself. Because if you're not going to promote, you may as well not write the book, as I said at the outset. You need a website. Bookmarks are helpful. I take my bookmarks everywhere I go, and I find excuses to hand them out to everybody, even the checker in the grocery store. Anywhere you go. Some people will print out a little excerpt of the book and hand that out. That could be helpful. You need a social media presence, a Facebook page, and not everybody likes that, but you really need it if you're going to market a book. Instagram, I don't do, but some people find helpful. Writing a blog is a good idea because you regularly connect. The whole key is to connect with people, not to sell books, but to connect with people, and selling books will be an outgrowth of that. Amazon ads, something to consider. I have a friend, this is my next thing to try. A friend of mine has a book that she said sold 300 copies in 3 days with an Amazon ad that cost her $100. So that's worth looking into. There's BookBub, and BookBub, you may or may not know, but it's a book subscription. I don't know, what do you call it? It's a subscription service, and every day they send you a list of about 5 or 6 books, ebooks that are free or very low cost. Now, when I first took out a BookBub ad, it cost about $300, and I made $6,000 in sales because they have over something like 2 million people who were readers in my genre. Now, as they've increased their readership, so the price has increased. I just looked this morning, and the kind of book that I write, an ad is now $840. It's still probably worth it. I always make way more money than I spend when I get a BookBub ad. And I looked up spiritual books, and that was, I think, $290, so much easier. Okay, doing podcast interviews. I just did an interview with Barry Eaton, who, thanks to Wendy's referral, and that's going to be on August 3rd. And we talked about all kinds of things, but I was able to talk about the new book. And there's lots of podcast interviews, and people who do them are always looking for good guests. You can give, if you're a good speaker, give talks. If you're not a good speaker yet, or you're afraid of speaking, go to Toastmasters, and they will teach you how to speak. There's loads of clubs that are always looking for speakers, like the Rotary Club, or networking groups, women's clubs, men's clubs, and they're always looking for speakers. You can sell books there. Write articles for various magazines. Make friends with bookstore personnel so that they will hand sell your books. And I like to do a book launch party. This costs a little money, and you can make it as small or as big as you like. I had one recently. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures for Proof of Life. And what I did was I booked a restaurant that I knew needed some help. They were new, and they need to have more people coming. And then I advertise it as a networking event. This is a book launch party and networking, and anybody who brings a prize can have 30 seconds at the microphone to talk about their business or what they do. So that way everybody wins. And then I get a whole bunch of prizes, and I do drawings for gifts. And we have food. Now, the food, in this case, it cost $600, but I didn't have to bear the whole cost of that because I invited 2 other authors to have a table with their books so they could sell as well. So it only cost me $200. So there's lots of different ways you can do that. You could just have wine and cheese. Could do it at a bookstore. There's many ways of doing it, but it's a good way to get the word out. And finally, you can do a book trailer. And I'm going to show you mine. It's only 30 seconds long. It cost me, I think, $60. And if you haven't found Fiverr, 5rr.com, you can get any number of helpful marketing things there, which we could talk about if you're interested. So here's my book launch party, and I had over 80 people there, and most of them bought books. So that was really good, and we had little cupcake things and Mexican food because it was a Mexican food restaurant. And finally, here's my 30-second book trailer.
Wow.
That's what can I say?
Sheila, that was just so fabulous. So much information there. I'm just staggered. I constantly see your marketing efforts, and I'm just in awe of your energy and your ideas. It's so creative. This is what I tell people, that writing the book is, in my experience, it's about 1/10 of the work.
Writing a book is hard, selling it is harder, and marketing it is the hardest of all, but it's just as important if you want to sell books.
Fantastic. Questions? Just raise your hand if you've got a question. There you go.
Hi, Sheila, I read your book. It's fantastic. I really loved it. Ask the point that you said earlier on about kill your darlings, no purple prose. Could you explain that a bit more?
Oh, well, back in earlier days, probably 100 years ago, the writing was very flowery and, lots of descriptive words, but we just don't need as much of that these days. So it depends on your own personal style and your voice. But, when I say voice, I mean how you write your voice on paper. So we just want to be a little clearer these days without all the flowery stuff.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Could I also suggest to people that it's useful to do a course in writing in plain English, because there are ways, like simple things like keeping your sentence length short.
A book that everybody can benefit from is the Strunk & White's Elements of Style. If you're going to write, you've got to know how to write. Everything that I said in those PowerPoints, we could take an hour or a day and talk about.
I've had a lot of people ask me to write, so it's in response to that. Unfortunately, everybody else seems to find my life a lot more interesting than I do. So I find I sit down with a cup of coffee, I open up the computer, everything's perfect, nice music on, and that's it. I just cannot begin. And every time I do, I delete. What's the formula for beginning a book?
Do you want to write a book?
Yeah.
Okay, then I think maybe outlining would be a good start for you. Just make a list of the topics you want to talk about. And then you can, then after you've made your list, go back and write a paragraph about each item, and then start filling it out. And pretty soon you've got a whole book.
So set out what I'd like to achieve in each chapter. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, just make a list of the topics and the subtopics, all of those things, and eventually they can be made into chapters. Don't even think about chapters. Just make a list of all the things that you want to discuss.
And I guess this is a silly question, but the best place to start would be right at the beginning.
Not necessarily.
No?
It depends.
Anne's
You know,
shaking her head. Let's pull Anne in. That was a strong reaction from Anne. Harrison. What would you like to say?
Oh, I've only written one book. I've helped with lots of others, and I helped Tom with his. But starting at the beginning is not necessarily, because you suddenly find that the beginning actually comes a long way. You start to write about something that is you really want to put down, and later you will find where it fits in. And my Harrison Connections was chronological, but the first chapters came quite late on, after I decided, well, that's no good. I need to introduce Tom, and I need to introduce how it happened with all the connections. So I'd written about various pieces about the communications he was giving me, but then find, no, I need to do so-and-so. So find something that really takes you, tuck it into a file, then maybe do another piece. And later you will find how they fit together. That's the only way I could do it. And it just went on until finally I found suddenly, and no, I thought I'd finished the book. I'd got an ending for it. And a message came through from Spirit saying, no, there's more to come. So, and in the end, the ending wasn't as I thought it. It was something completely different. But just let it develop. It's like a wonderful journey, and you might take a side road and then come back to it and take a break and think, oh no, that fits before that. And that's the only way I can say. It was just writing from the heart and from as things happened. And but yeah, sometimes it is very, very progressive through 1, 2, 3, and you know where it's going. Other times, just go with a gut instinct. Write what you want to write, and then see how it comes together.
you know, there's a rule. Well, they say there's 3 rules in writing, but nobody knows what they are. Excuse me, I got a frog today. That happened to me on national TV a few weeks ago. It was really embarrassing. They say to start as far into the story as you can. And that may be true in fiction, but it can also be true in nonfiction, depending what you're writing about. And if it's your story, yes, right? You can start in as far as you can go. And as Anne said, you can come back later and add other things as appropriate. But if you start by it, if you just got to get started, make that list of what you want to write about. At least it will get you going.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Jane, you've written quite a few books. Can you tell us your process? How do you go about it?
Sure, Sheila, thank you very much. This has been a wonderful session. I'm an outliner, like Sheila is. I don't necessarily write from point 1 in my outline. If I have a kind of a high energy writing day, I will write the things that I don't really want to write. I'll go through my outline and go through those things and pick up those things. If I have kind of a lower energy writing day, then I'll write those things that I'm really excited about, and that will change where my energy is. So if I'm writing from research, I will usually write the results section first, because I find that to be more fun and more exciting to write about. But I kind of play with it back and forth a little bit. The only one I didn't do that with was the children's book, because it was a story, and I wanted to see the progression of that story. I knew where I wanted it to go and what aspects I wanted, but the children's book I kind of wrote from the beginning to the end.
Okay. Sherry, can I call on you? What's your process?
I don't know if I really have a process. Yes, I often drew up some kind of an outline of what were the things that I wanted to generally cover. But then, like my very first book, which is nonfiction, was my healing story, as you know. And I started writing it in 1985. And I went through it step by step. This is the story. This is what happened to me so that was really like just a chronological, but I'm a shoot from the hip kind of gal, and something takes over me when there's something I need to talk about. It just raises up to the surface. And then of course I do go back and decide maybe this doesn't need to be in. And of course, always had editors, to kind of look it over and help me with that. But I can't say that I'm a taught writer. That I studied these steps and then employed them. I wrote what I knew I had to tell, but it was as if I knew I had to tell what I had to tell, so it just came through. And now the book about my son passing and the ways in which we began in the very beginning to communicate with each other, it kind of wrote itself, because as events happened and I was so astounded, I would write about it. So that it was like a living story, because I'd go out one day and I'd have an event in the Apple store in which his name shows up on the screen right next to all kinds of things, where I'd come home and go, oh my God, that was awesome. I've got to write this up in a chapter. Or something that happened in a seance with Roland Comtois, medium Roland Comtois. It wrote itself through the time that I was actually living it. And then my books after that one is a book of quotes on life after death with commentary and original photographs my friend Joni took. I just went seeking I've always been looking for quotes for the bereavement community, for the parents, that are uplifting about life after death. And so I put together the ones that I loved the most and that I thought were the most eclectic, and then wrote commentary as to what it means to me and what I think the author of the quote is trying to tell us. But it's just, I don't know how to say that. I don't know if I have a process in a specific.
I think that what Marcus is wanting to do is very similar to you, Sherry, to your process, because what's coming to me, Marcus, is what about keeping a diary of just as things happen, just like a journal, just jot down what happened to you today.
I think that'd work a lot better, actually. I was trying to look at it from some systematic, robotic almost approach. Bang, 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 bang. But what you've just suggested, I think, is would work for me.
Even if you wrote it on Facebook, as you do, and then collect all your past posts.
Well, that's one of the benefits, is I have recorded a lot on Facebook. So,
yeah. So there you go.
There's another element in this group that, of course, I didn't address, and that is spirit. And so with what Sherry had, and what some others of you have. And in fact, when I was writing Proof of Life, I have been told by several different mediums, at least 3, that my daughter was working with me on the book. not exactly channeling. I wish it was that easy. It wasn't, but there were certainly times when I knew that I was getting help from spirit, and sometimes I asked for it and it would just come like a download. So that's something additional to consider in this group.
I never really thought of myself as a writer, and yet I had an interest in my heart as a writer, or I want to do the same thing, you know, like whether I was reading Dyer, Van Frank, or whatever. So I guess what I want to first say to Marcus is that your desires will come out of a lot of the books that you read, or at least that was how it was for me. And then I've always been, over the course of my studies in school and preparation for helping others, I became an avid journalist, or not journalist, writing in a journal. And so when you said, Wendy, about the keeping a diary or a journal, because it doesn't matter what you say there. You can say any words you want, and spirit will hear it and not spank your hand for saying it. So I write sometimes 4-letter words in my journal, but that's the place where I have safety, because before I begin writing, I always put into words kind of like a mantra for me, a blessing, a mantra, or a request for, as one of our former speakers said, as a benevolent outcome of what I desire most. And so many times, and I do that every time now, and then it got to be a habit. But I also want to say that when I got started, I didn't even know I was a writer. What I started doing was attending writers' workshops. I went all over nationally and internationally to writers' workshops. I went to writers' conferences, and that's actually where my taste for, well, maybe there is a book in me. But then I didn't know where to go with any of that, because it's like nobody can really say where to go. There is one feature, though, that I haven't heard yet that might be helpful, and it's called mind mapping. And if you don't know about that, I'm going to invite you to Google that and really get in touch with yourself and with what it is within that you really want to say. You're probably doing that in your Facebook things. And so you might want to take those Facebook posts and put them in different places. It's kind of like a map, and you just stick them there. And it's kind of like putting up sticky notes. Those are some things that I did, and it worked for me. At any rate, I've written 2 nonfiction books, and I have to say, with regard to Sheila, the biggest and the most expensive aspect of writing a book is really about the marketing. And I got in pretty deeply with marketing and the cost involved or whatever. But the outcome of my books have been for me today, having written the books in, I think my first book launch was in I believe it was 2012 or 2013, just before I had my heart attack. And it was very profound. But today, what I recognize is that that was my way of talking to spirit. Others bought the book, thank you, God. But what I'm saying is that I spent a lot of time on the marketing effort. But when I actually let go of my attachment to marketing it, I was at the doctor's office just the other day. I was on the wrong floor. And a lady came up, she was one of the doctors, and she said, Pat Connor. And I just, you know, it's like I turned around. I was talking to another lady. I think I'm on the wrong floor with the wrong doctor here. And the gal was giving me information. And this doctor had she said, I purchased your book. I was at your first book launch. I didn't even know the lady. So I guess what I'm saying is that we have to be real clear, it seems to me, of what we want spirit to do with us and through the gift within us for what the benevolent outcome will be. So I say start chasing where authors sit and sip and chat and chew. You know, writers' conferences are a great place to hear all of the things that Sheila has shared today and more. and more in depth and more like workshops. It reminds me of those workshops that took the place for me of going with continuing education units in the mental health field to writing books. So I changed my perspective, changed my goals. And so those are just some things I wanted to say. And that as seekers on the path, which we all are, I guess we have to really know what we want, what outcome we want for ourselves. And thanks to Tom the other day, and also thanks to Donna last week we're having, and I'm not going to talk any further, but Marcus, I wish you well. And it is for me that I hold a benevolent outcome that you get exactly what you want.
Muted. Yeah, I work differently. I actually, for most of my books, write like a book proposal. And in the proposal, I do, you know, a basic overview of what I want in the book. I try to write that one sentence, what they call an elevator blurb that you want to do, you know, in one sentence, what is the book going to be about? And I actually, for all of my books, even the latest one, I have chapters with brief descriptions of what I want to have within those chapters. Now, sometimes, of course, things change. I'm not locked into it, but I do have a map, kind of a map of where I'm going from the beginning to the end of the book. And then I systematically will work on the different sections, but I don't have to work on it sequentially. You know, for example, with the Unfolding Physical Mediumship book, I had a chapter on, you know, what is physical mediumship, or what is the phenomena, how do people become physical mediums, and what was it, sitting, a chapter on circles and sitting. So when I was coming across my research, when I was doing my research on it, when I found something that related to the topic of a chapter, I would plug it into that chapter. So I got to a point where I had like 2/3 of the book written, but it wasn't, like, the first part wasn't finished. None of it was finished, but it was 2/3 of the way written because I plugged in stuff in different areas. Now, what happens to me intuitively, it's interesting that you ask that, is that ironically, lots of times when I'm writing, stuff will pop up and appear that I need for the book. You know, for example, I'll be researching a topic and then all of a sudden there's a new source or a new book, or somebody says something that fits in right with what I'm doing. So things start to fall together very quickly. And I also know that with some of it, I know Spirit's giving me information, so that a lot of my books, even the academic ones, are written with some help from Spirit, because they're helping me put the pieces together in different ways. But I kind of want to know where I'm going before I start it.
I think that I'm going to second what others have said about, for me, I start with an outline, but it's a combination of Spirit and where I feel drawn and led to express, and along with the outline. So, and then I also like what you said, Susan, about, for me, it's more like I'm assembling the book. It's like I'll have a visualization that I've written, and I think it's going to go in this chapter. And so it's like pulling these pieces together and threading them together.
Yes. That's what I do. Yeah.
Great, thank you. What I find useful to ask people is, what have you learned that you wish you had known when you started writing?
How hard it was going to be. You know, with starting out with a big publisher, I just assumed that they were going to do all of the marketing, but that wasn't true then, and it's not true now. Whether you have a big publisher or a small one, you, the author, are going to be responsible for most of the marketing, doing it and paying for it.
What are some of the problems that people have with their publishers?
I think one was well, people have hit on, is that they think that their book should be a bestseller, when in actual fact it's a very limited appeal unless the person is known. And as Sheila was saying, if you can get out and do a talk, then you're more likely to sell the book. And this is part of the author, and this really happened because the person in question was actually a very good medium and took lots of services, and the addresses that he gave were very good. And somebody suggested you ought to put them into a book that would be good to, you know, for people to do. And he did this, he put them together. I had a lot of work to do on sorting and illustrating. And because with the companies I work with, Lightning Source, which is part of Ingram's, so many book retailers and internet sites can say they've got the book in stock when they haven't, because it was print on demand. And he kept going on the internet and finding there were books in Sweden and books in France and New Zealand and Australia. And these booksellers were saying, it's in stock. No, supply you in 7 days. Well, they didn't have it in stock. So he thought that I was actually defrauding him, because I was saying, you haven't sold any books. And yet he was finding all these notices on the internet. And so in the end, I couldn't get through to him at all. And in the end, he said, well, I think you better take it out of print. And so we did. But 5 years later, people are asking him personally, you know, have you got a copy of your book? He said, but they're selling it for £75, Anne, online. And I said, yes, a second-hand copy. It's not a new one. A bookseller has got it. And this is largely the problems I've had, because a lot of most of my other books, as you know, are reprints of old books. And I would say everybody is very content with what I'm doing. But this was just somebody who didn't understand the way of technology nowadays. But we have brought it back in, but it's not going to be on the internet. It's not going to be on Amazon. He can order them, and I can order them, and that's so we've just gone to what Lightning Source called short run, instead of it being distribution, and in that way we know we've got control of it. That's the only real problem I've had with it.
If you feel like you have a book in you and you're being inspired to write the book, and then give it to friends and give it to family, but write the book. That's the first thing, though. So don't let things like how many you're going to sell impede you from doing that. And the second thing is, then you really need to have an editor and a proofreader involved in the process. And with the editor and the proofreader, then they will take it to the manuscript level. And after you've gotten to the manuscript level, then you can go to a source like Lightning. I used to use WordPress. And you can format the book. You can do it yourself. It's easy to do, or you can have someone else format it. And then you can get it published. And there are print on demand. They are print on demand publishers. Don't expect to sell more than somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 of your books. That's the average. That's the average for these kinds of books. They just don't. You don't get on the New York Times bestseller list. You're going to be selling somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000. You might go up to 4 or 5 of it's really good, but don't expect to sell very many more than that. So the important thing is, if you want to write a book, write the book. That's really important. You've got to do that. And then we will help you in AREI if you've got a book that you want to publish. At the very least, we can give you advice about it, about how you can do it yourself. And then at best, if we can put the resources into helping you format it, getting you together with editors and proofreaders. We have many that we use that we can help you to find, and then we will help you to get it to the publisher like Lightning Source or Kindle Direct Publishing, and then they will be able to take you the rest of the way, but we will advise you all the way. So if you have a book in you, write the book, and then if we can, we will help you with the book.